Christian Parenting.
The lessons our kids learn in the early years of their lives are extremely important. If you are a parent with young kids, you will want to stay tuned for today's conversation on Family Vision.
Hi, my name is Lainey Reno. Welcome to Family Vision with my parents, Dr. Rob and Amy Reno, strengthening families through practical, encouraging, and real conversations.
Hi, I'm Amy Reno, and I am so excited to be back in the studio again for Family Vision and a conversation today about those early years of parenting, those little ones when, let's say, birth to 5. We have been starting this podcast. We have been kind of entrenched, I feel, with a lot of discipleship issues in reference to older kids. In fact, we just got through talking about the wedding of Lissy and kind of launching kids. But it's so easy to kind of forget how critical and challenging those early years of parenting are. And lately, I've just been burdened to come in here and have some conversations about that because those are such important years for the development of not only our kids' lives, but even setting the culture of our family. And the Lord has just kind of encouraged me in the past couple of weeks. I've had 2 conversations with young moms friends of my kids who are now having kids, and they both have just one child that they're taking care of, and they're asking me all these questions. How did you do this? How did you do that? And I thought, okay, the Lord is telling me it's now time to come in and do a couple episodes about some of those early challenges we have when we first become parents and our kids are all little. Before I even get into this, I do want to emphasize that I am not doing a biblical exegesis on parenting. And when we get into the topics that we're going to talk about today, people have very strong opinions. And there are a lot of different books and theories written about how to handle parenting from these early years. And I've always been amazed at just how contentious those conversations can be with people. But what I just want to do today is just simply have a conversation with you and share really from my own experience. So these are Amy Reno's opinions in many ways. I'm going to give you some of the guidelines that I followed, but you are welcome to disagree with me, and hopefully you keep a conversation going with those moms that you are interacting with or other parents that you're interacting with. But that's really what we're doing here. We're just having a conversation about what things worked and the lessons that I learned over my experience of being a parent for these past 24 years. I can't believe it's even been this long. But I want to point to one Bible verse, and that's Isaiah 40:11. And if I would have to pick a Bible verse that I would say was central to the way I viewed parenting, it would be this verse. In Isaiah 40:11, it says, "He will protect his flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs in his arm. He will carry them in his bosom. He will gently and carefully lead those nursing their young." Now, this verse from Isaiah gave me great comfort as a young mom because for 2 reasons. One was that it sort of gave me a picture as a mom of how I was parenting my own little flock, about, protecting them, keeping them close to me, guiding them gently. It just gave me a visual image that I could really connect with about how I wanted to enter into this parenting process. But it also taught me that my Heavenly Father was gently and carefully leading me as I was nursing young and taking care of young. And that's also such a beautiful image that when you think of a shepherd who is, got a lot of sheep to manage, and some of the sheep that he's managing also have their own little babies, and he's gently leading them and guiding them. Because being a parent and raising children is really about learning from experience and making mistakes and picking yourself up and figuring out how to do it again and constantly growing. And when you have those little kids, you are truly drinking from a fire hydrant in what I would say almost every day, because your learning curve is just huge. I mean, you're learning about one stage and your child's already into the next stage, and let alone just learning about the different stages of parenting as you go through with your kids. But then you're also on this learning kid curve with each of your individual kids as you're learning about their personalities. So you are just in this stage of your life, which frankly lasts a very long time, of just daily having so much to take in and to learn. And especially if you are a parent with little ones, I remember having the feeling that I was just running a marathon every day. Now, I've never run a marathon, so maybe that's not the best analogy. But from my own experience, I would just be so exhausted at the end of the day. And I'd go to bed and I'd feel like, oh my gosh, I feel like I just ran a marathon. And then I'd be like, oh, I'm doing it tomorrow. It just was relentless. The amount of physical challenge and just activity that is required to parent little children, especially if you have multiple under the age of 4 or 5. So the first thing I really want to emphasize, and as we begin this conversation, is how important it is for moms, and I will say parents too, but I'm a mom, so I'm always kind of speaking to the hearts of the moms out there. That's just where I'm at. But moms really need to learn to trust their instincts. That is critical because at the end of the day, you are the expert on your children, and no one else is a better expert than you. And that's why it's so important that babies and little kids spend lots of time with their moms, because just like the babies and little kids are learning all about you, you are learning all about them. But your instincts are absolutely critical. In my book, Not So Perfect Mom, I use the phrase a teachable expert, because we do have so much to learn, and we have to be humble in our lack of knowledge. I mean, I feel like, again, as a young mom, I would be talking to other moms at the grocery store and at the swimming pool. When I saw a mom that had more kids than I and we'd get in a conversation, I would be asking her questions. How did you do this? How did you do that? I was always soaking up information. And the Lord really did gently and carefully lead me through all of those many conversations. But I had to learn at the end of the day to trust my instincts. I remember such a vivid example of this with my daughter, Lissy. RW was my first was a really easy baby. Anybody could hold him, happy baby kind of thing. And Lissy was, I won't say she was a difficult baby, but what was difficult for me was that she really would only be comforted by me till she was 6 months old. And so whether I was nursing her and feeding her, or just if she was upset and I was holding her, if I was holding her, she was good. If anybody else was holding her, not so much, including Rob. And we always laugh how by 6 months, Lissy decided that Rob was a good guy as well. But it took her that long. But I would be reading these baby books and I knew that she had some form of separation anxiety. I couldn't understand it, but I would read these baby books and be like, oh, babies don't develop separation, anxiety till they're like, 11 months or 12 months. I'm like, oh, that's so weird, because she definitely feels like she's got separation anxiety. I mean, she wouldn't let anybody else comfort her but me. And we go to her 3-month appointment, and the doctor is, not even 3 months. It was like 2 months. And I put her down on the table and she starts crying and crying and crying. And the doctor looks at me and says, this baby has separation anxiety already. And I was like, thank you. Yes, that's what I've been saying. And so it was so encouraging, because I was like, yes, I knew that's what it was. But to have that doctor come in and just validate my instincts was super helpful for me, especially in this process of how important it is to learn as a mom to trust your instincts. You have to be the one to go to bat for your kids so many times, and you need to feel confident that God is leading you as you are parenting your children. Now, before I continue in our conversation today, I wanted to just read a little bit from our book, Visionary Parenting, which is available at our website, visionaryfam.com, and you can also find it where other books are sold. But I wanted to read you a section from this book because I think it's a great springboard as we continue our conversation. This is from the chapter on discipleship and discipline. We talked about the need to create a safe home for our children and the necessity of building heart connection with them. You can think of building healthy attachment with your very young children as forming your heart connection with them. Healthy attachment means that a child experiences love and security from her parents and therefore learns to trust her parents. Is this not the same thing that our Heavenly Father wants us to learn? He wants us to experience His love and understand that He gives us security so we will trust Him. This is an essential discipleship lesson that all babies and young children need to learn. They need to learn to trust in the love and security that only their parents can truly provide. Therefore, providing love and security for our children is the most important discipleship task we have in these first few years of life. Young children only learn by experience. This statement deserves repeating. Young children only learn by experience. They need to learn that when they cry, someone will come to comfort them. They need to experience affection when they are being calm, sweet babies or sick and colicky babies. They need an environment where they feel safe. Love and security needs to be experienced daily for young kids to trust their parents. It is a myth that a child in this age of development can be spoiled with too much love or physical affection. God loves us extravagantly, and we can feel free to love our children with extravagance. I wanted to read that section. It's kind of a launching pad for the rest of our discussion today, because those words, love and security, are the most important lessons that we want our children to learn in these early years. And when it comes to teaching love and security, I feel like there are these two major tasks that we face as moms that are actually really critical in also teaching love and security. And that is eating and sleeping. That's it. Eating and sleeping. We all know, and when we become a mom, that how we feed our babies and how we handle their sleep schedules are probably the most critical things we deal with in the almost first year, but definitely the first 3 to 6 months. And whenever you are a mom and someone asks like how you're doing, the very next question is, how are they eating? How are they sleeping? These are your critical tasks that you face. And when I became a mom, what I did not realize is how controversial these things are to so many people. Now, someone had blessed me with this book on breastfeeding. I don't know, I got it as a shower gift and I read it and it made a lot of sense to me. I'm telling my girlfriend about this book and how I really like it, and she's just horrified on the other end. She's like, I cannot believe you're reading that book. And I was shocked. I was like, well, I think it's a pretty good book. And she just really was that was like from the devil, in her opinion. So I was just so surprised. I mean, I was like, wait, I didn't know, this was going to be such a controversial thing, feeding my baby on a schedule versus what I later learned was demand feeding. And let alone, that is just the controversy in the whole breastfeeding world. If you go to another step, would just simply be breastfeeding versus formula feeding. So, it can be endless what we're faced with when we become parents. And so, fast forwarding a little bit, despite my girlfriend's protests that this was going to be so detrimental for my child, I went ahead and followed a lot of the examples in this book for my first baby, RW. We put him on a schedule. We did the whole what I really loved about the book was this emphasis on feeding your baby, letting the baby play a little bit, and then fall asleep as opposed to eating and then sleeping and then playing. That I thought was fantastic. That was just a great routine. And that kind of model helped me with all babies afterwards. I really appreciated that I got that nugget of wisdom from that book. But we were doing this whole schedule thing. I was like writing down when he would eat, and if he was fussing before the next feeding, I would let him fuss before I would feed him, and I kind of followed this model. It worked out great. Lissy comes along. I try to follow this model. Okay, first of all, life is way crazier with 2 than 1, as we all know. It just wasn't working the same way. I didn't have even time to write a schedule. And this is just with 2. And first of all, she was also, like I already said before, she was very clingy to me, and it just changed everything. She was nothing like my first baby, and she just needed me so much more. So a lot of that book went out the window, and I became much more of a demand feeder. And I just say that to give you guys some peace that are dealing with some of those issues on these basic things like feeding your baby, that it really is going to be okay. And that a good parent will learn a good parent is going to learn their child's cry and is going to learn the best way to feed their baby. And it might be a schedule or it might be demand feeding. I know people who've done both. I've personally done both. And reality is that I've raised basic healthy children on both types of schedules. And I think I just want to give you that little takeaway again on following your instincts on these things and realizing that there's a time and place and there's a lot of room for variance when it comes to something as simple as how we feed our babies. And just in another example, my sister-in-law was never able to breastfeed her baby, and that was such a heartache for her. She had 3 children. They ended up all on formula, and they are all 3 functioning, wonderful adults right now with their own children and doing marvelous. So just, again, these things can become so big in our lives. And I think that is a distraction from really going back to the love and security that we want to communicate to our children in this age. And and feeding them is part of our kids learning to trust us and as babies learning to know that we love them. I think another thing that you see often is in this mindset of you should always put your child's needs, feed your children according to their needs, not your own needs. That's another, whatever you want to call it, thing out there. Like you'd be doing something wrong if you were feeding them according to your needs. Well, I can't even tell you the amount of times that I nursed a baby on a plane just to make me, the baby, and everyone else on that plane a whole lot happier because no one wants to listen to a screaming baby. Now, was that based on their needs? I think it was based on trying to just make the situation a little bit easier. So I don't even hold that theory very much, that there's times then you just have to you feed your baby on the go, you feed your baby in a way that just makes life easier for everyone involved. So again, I've managed to do this with all 7 of my children. And I'm here to tell you that none of them being fed on demand are these self-centered, can't handle waiting for something, and which sometimes that makes you feel like this when you get into these debates on these things that you're going to raise these completely self-centered children if you do this. I would say that is a bit of an exaggeration. So don't be wedded to a system, but be wedded to learning the needs of your child, learning the needs of your family, and what works best for you, whether they are schedule-fed, demand-fed, whether you have to feed them on formula. I always, always, always recommend to moms that breastfeeding, if you can do it, it is the best. And for doing it as long as you can, I'm just going to throw those 2 cents in too. My kids who I breastfed the longest, even up to 18 months or even maybe a little past, even 20 months, by far the healthiest. And I did learn that through the 7 years. So I would encourage you with that. But again, there's a lot of freedom in all of that. But this process of how you feed them is teaching your kids that you love them and you are providing security for them by meeting their needs. But eating goes right into the next big issue in early parenting, and that's sleeping. Sleep schedules and dealing with that as a new mom with adding one child after another becomes a major issue when you are struggling with getting sleep and your child might be struggling with getting sleep. Now, again, my first child, RW, he slept literally 12 hours starting at 5 weeks old. Now, I did really have a 10-month pregnancy, so I guess you could say he was you could almost add 4 weeks onto that. I mean, everyone thought he was such an advanced child, but really he just came out a month old. I think that's kind of what happened there. But anyway, he was advanced, I guess we could say. But he slept 12 hours very, very early, which was just lovely, wonderful. I mean, nothing to complain about there. But meanwhile, my sister-in-law had his cousin, her whole first year of parenting, I don't think JR slept more than 4 or 5 hours at a time the whole first year. And she was dedicated to every sleeping book there was. And there was just not a way to solve that problem. And I saw her go through so many different systems and try to figure it out. And at the end of the day, JR still doesn't need that much sleep. And that's just the way it is. So sleeping is can become such a issue that you struggle with as a new parent. So let me just give you a couple guidelines here that I think were very helpful for me. One is what I call the Korean model. Now, I was blessed to have a couple friends who were from Korea who had a completely different view of parenting than we get in the West. And a lot of that was in relation to sleeping and having their children sleep in the same room with them, sleep in the same bed with them. They just had a firm belief that you keep your children close as their children so that they will be able to be apart from you when they're older. And that was just kind of the ongoing model. And that really was encouraging to me because I was in quite a different world where even though, we happened to be living with my parents when our W was born, so we were doing an addition on our house, and he was in a bassinet in our room, and my parents would keep saying, well, when are you moving him to his crib? When are you moving? Isn't it time to move him to his crib? He's only like 5 or 6 weeks old. And it was like, oh, he needs to move to the crib. It was like a big thing. Like he's got to sleep in his own room. It's just very interesting to me because because of that pressure, moved him into the crib at an early age. I didn't do that with any other of my kids. I kept them close in the bassinet next to my bed or sleeping in my bed for a much longer time. And I really found that babies just love and thrive on that close physical contact. And the more that they have, in my opinion, the better. And this whole idea that a baby needs to be pushed into another room at a young age, because that's some critical milestone, I think really is kind of a first world issue. I mean, when you think about the baby's born in I always thought about Ma and Pa Ingalls on Little House on the Prairie. I mean, baby Carrie didn't have her own room. I mean, she couldn't have had her own room. People generally, the basic model would be all the family sleeping in the same bed, let alone different rooms. So I just want to encourage you that the path of least resistance became my motto when it came to sleep. And what I meant by the path of least resistance is I would ask myself, what path gives the most amount of people in this house the most amount of sleep? And whatever that path was, that was the path we chose because sleep was the most important thing. So I really think that, again, just like the feeding schedule, the whole sleeping thing, you need to be comfortable as a mom, as a parent, to do what works best for you, knowing that these phases will pass and you will have opportunities to teach your children to sleep in their own rooms. There's going to be plenty of opportunities to teach them all the lessons that you need to teach. And whether exactly where and how the kid is sleeping the first year of life or your child's sleeping, I shouldn't necessarily say the kid, is really going to be okay. And just to conclude this, to wrap this up with kind of a funny story, we did have 7 kids over a span of 16 years, but my first 6 were all about 2 years apart. They were 6 and 12 years. But by the time my 6th child came along, life was pretty busy because we were already starting kind of in the junior high phases of life for my older kids, and our W had a lot of baseball games and a lot of activities going on in the evening. We were in ministry. We did a lot of travel. We were traveling to Moscow and Scotland on some of these extended ministry trips. And so Ray didn't really grow up with much of a schedule at all, except for being kind of on the run. And when he was about 7 years old, he came up to me and said, "Mom, what's a bedtime?" And I was kind of struck at the question. I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Well, what's a bedtime? Like, my friends keep asking me, what's my bedtime?" And I was like, I was just stunned. I'm like, oh, they're asking you like what time you go to bed. Yeah, you've really never had that. Yeah, like I had to explain to him what a bedtime was and what used to be the norm in the Reno house for the first 4 to 5 kids, but kind of had faded by the time number 6 came along. So we basically kind of settled on kind of a pretend bedtime for him. I first told him, well, Ray, your bedtime is basically when you fall asleep. That's kind of how it's been for you your whole life. But we did settle for his sake like a time that he could tell his friends, this is my bedtime. And he had fun for about like 3 days, going to bed at that time. But then he realized he liked his old system better. So all that to say is, even when it comes to basic things like sleep, you can have all sorts of variety of how to manage that in your home and still raise healthy kids as long as those first discipleship needs of love and security are met in those early years. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation today. We'll be picking up this again in our next podcast. And again, the book I read today was Visionary Parenting, and you can get that on our website at visionaryfam.com. So join us again next week on Family Vision.